According to legend, the house that the members of Love lived in had a red telephone. Although the song lyrics do not relate to this at all. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints. It's the show where friends and musicians dig deep into the backgrounds and stories behind some of history's most influential albums and bands as immortalized in the list of 1001 albums you must hear before you die. We're going to give some history on the band, on the album. We're going to do a deep dive on a handful of the tracks. And at the end, we're going to vote on whether you actually need to hear this album before you die. This week, we've been listening to the band Love and their third album, 1967's Forever Changes. Just to get everybody situated, I'm going to play a little snippet from the opening track of Love's Forever Changes. This one is called This Week. I would love to go around the room and hear our tweet-length reviews of Love's Forever Changes. I'm going to kick it first to our friend Alan.
So picture this, it's 1967, it's the summer of love, hippies, tie-dye, right? The whole deal. Now here comes this band with the name of Love. So naturally, you turn on this album and you're presented with songs about paranoia, darkness, mortality, and an occasional mariachi band. It all makes absolutely no sense, but goddamn it, it works.
You heard it here first, folks. Love makes no sense. Thank you for that. We're going to go next to Adam.
Hey, everybody. This is Adam. And damn it, Alan, you stole my mariachi line. So I will just improv here and just say, this album's great. I mean, yeah, I'll stick with that and then we'll dive into it.
Wait, did you love the album?
Well, there's some highs and some lows. It's not all love, but I think at the end, well, we'll see. I'll save the magic for the end.
Love isn't just a day at the carnival, after all. Okay, last but not least. Well, actually, I'll be last but not least. So next up, we have Phil.
What's up, everybody? Phil joining this week. So yeah, this week's Love record was an interesting track. I mean, I think it took us through the 60s sort of folk psychedelia of Richie Havens and Rodriguez and maybe even Lennon and McCartney and Mamas and Papas psychedelic vocal pop harmony, and I love all those things, but it also has like a real dawning of Aquarius thing going on, and I really hate that shit. So I'm still trying to integrate, and we'll see where it lands. I'm ready to be convinced that this is great, though, because this is definitely a breath of fresh air compared to some of the other recent releases we've had to stomach.
I think this is going to be a good episode then, because I sense conflict internally to everyone around this virtual table, and I have to admit I feel the same way. So my tweet-length review of Love's Forever Changes, which I listened to for the very first time this week. This record is singular and strange. Part King Crimson meets Crosby, Stills, and Nash, part 60s bargain bin detritus.
There were moments where I thought to myself, this is completely forgettable. Like there were moments where I was like, why do I even, but then it grew on me. This one definitely grew on me this week. Short enough that I could run it a bunch, interesting enough that I could sink my teeth into it. But yeah, there are spots where it just sounds like you were to do the AI generator of 1960s psychedelic rock.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say it grew on me, but actually it's kind of the reverse. I think I started out feeling really good. We played the opening track. I said, oh, this is going to be a good week. I'm excited about this. I've never heard it. It sounds fresh. It sounds vital. But the more I listened, the deeper I got into the tracks, and frankly, the more I read about how great and beloved this record is by every hipster out there, the more annoyed I got. There was so much highfalutin, philosophizing, pretentious bullshit surrounding this record, including from the surviving band members themselves, that it really kind of started to turn me off. But let me give a little bit of background and then we're going to go around and talk general impressions. And I have to admit, this one just puzzled me, so I ended up doing quite a bit of research. Hopefully, we'll get to the bottom of this. So let's talk dates and stats. This was recorded in the so-called Summer of Love in Los Angeles, California, from June to September of 1967. But as Alan alluded to in his tweet, the Summer of Love really was never the Summer of Love. At that point, the hippie movement had already been co-opted, and the original progenitors of the hippie flower power love culture in San Francisco and LA and other places had already moved on. They felt like the masses had found them, and in fact there was a tone of paranoia and growing discontent and the Vietnam War and all these other things and these themes you hear on the record. So we're going to get into that because I think Love is ultimately a very paranoid kind of 60s band. This was released shortly after that recording, November 1st of 1967. It did not sell a lot of copies. It peaked at 154 on the Billboard charts in the US. It did better over in the UK. It went up to 24. But interestingly, and for reasons we will describe, the band Love never made it to the UK to play even one show.
Well, it sounded like they had a hard time just getting their shit together enough to even record this. From what I read, it's interesting, the UK connection though, because I also took note of how much people seem to love this album as one of those cult classics. And a lot of that love actually comes from the UK. So there's all kinds of info about Robert Plant being sort of obsessed with this band and others. So yeah, interesting connection.
I think part of what you had, right, was Love was an early part of this LA hippie scene. This is their third album. So they had already been playing around LA and gaining quite a following in the years leading up to this, in the kind of mid-60s. And were selling out shows all throughout LA and were very hip. And one of the things they were known to be was, they were one of the first integrated bands. So let's talk about the members of this band. You have Arthur Lee and Johnny Eccles. Arthur Lee is the vocalist, kind of the leader of the band, and Johnny Eccles, his childhood friend, is playing guitar. Those fellows are both African American, and then the rest of the band is white. Brian McLean plays guitar, a guy called Ken Forsey plays bass on this record, and Michael Stewart Ware plays drums. And I think in the mid-60s in Los Angeles, that was one thing that kind of just, I don't want to say shocked people, because hearing these interviews, the folks that lived and hung out in Hollywood in those days considered themselves enlightened and progressive, but it still wasn't that common for black and white people to be hanging out, and it wasn't that common for black artists to be crossing over kind of into this rock genre. The second reason that I think Love made a powerful impression on people was the way they dressed, specifically the way Arthur Lee dressed. So he's kind of credited with just being a very flamboyant, crazy-looking guy on stage. People say that Jimi Hendrix kind of took a lot of visual cues from him in terms of fashion and stage persona. And I think they were just kind of a little bit forward-thinking, right? But the reason the UK might have liked him so much is because they just romanticized this whole scene. Because by the time they actually got to LA, it had all fallen apart because of drugs and murder. The Manson murders were sort of right around the corner, and that's one of the things kind of lurking in the LA air at this point, right? So it was like a brief moment where this Sunset Strip LA scene, you had Love, and after them, kind of their little brother band, you had The Doors. So Jim Morrison also idolized Arthur Lee big time, and would literally like sit on the porch of his house and ask to hang out, and Arthur Lee apparently didn't like him at all and shoo him away.
Get the hell out of here, you freak.
Yeah, I was wondering how long it would take for the Doors connection to come in, because there are some aspects of this that sound like, a precursor to the Doors. The idea that the Doors were so much more commercially successful than this group, I can kind of understand it, but at the same time, I don't agree with that, dynamic.
Okay, so let's talk about their connection to the Doors. So the Doors were their friend. They were friends with a lot of the people, a lot of big names. And in fact, one of the things about this record, again, they picked up a lot of heat. They hung out with a lot of the scenesters in Hollywood at that time. And so we're going to drop some names here. So Johnny Eccles grows up in LA and has, in fact, a high school band with Billy Preston.
No way.
And so he's actually gigging and touring with a young Billy Preston. And his family was friends. He was family friends with Little Richard. So he actually got a gig opening for Little Richard, or maybe being his back. No, not his backing man. It was an opening band. And at one point, there's a story that they actually got to fly to England to open up for Little Richard on a tour. Him and Billy Preston and that band. And who did they meet when they were over there? Who was also opening for Little Richard, but the Quarrymen. Now, flash forward a few more years, they met these guys briefly, and flash forward a few years, and one Brian Epstein sends Billy Preston and Johnny Eccles backstage passes to see the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. They apparently had no idea that they even knew these guys until they got backstage.
Wow. Oh, that's hilarious.
Oh, these dudes.
And then that band broke up because Billy Preston was in the Beatles. Low key in the Beatles.
I think Billy Preston he was going places already.
Sure,
I think he moved on from that cover band pretty quickly and became a session musician. But one of the other names I was going to drop was Neil Young. Neil Young was also on this scene in a band called Buffalo Springfield, and he was originally supposed to be the producer of this album. So there's some conflicting stories about why that almost happened or why it didn't happen. But some people say that Neil Young had just left Buffalo Springfield and he was broke. He needed money and the record company was paying. And they offered the producing gig to him. And that he changed his mind at some point and said, you know what, I got to go off and do solo material. And he went off and started making his solo records, which were obviously hugely successful.
He's like, I don't know what all these knobs do. Give me the hell out of here.
Yeah. I mean, I think something definitely to be noted there is like at this time in 1966, right? Producing a record most definitely meant getting 8 to 10 tracks on a vinyl to release, right? Do you know the people? Can you get into the studios, right? Do you have any idea? I think it was less about like aesthetic. Yeah, less about aesthetic choices.
Being plugged in to the scene.
Well, you're finishing the project, right?
Yeah, you're right. And somewhat to coax the band into their best performances and things like that, right? But I agree, less maybe of a creative exercise back then. But you're pointing out something important, which is music is at an inflection point here. And, well, we did already mention them, but I should point out that Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out in May of 1967. And at this album, I think at its worst, sounds like a cut rate Sgt. Pepper's. Like they just heard all the horns and orchestration on Sgt. Pepper's. Like, yeah, we need that too. Just throw it in there.
I didn't think about that, but yeah, I see that now.
So okay, so a little more on the background of the band, right? So Johnny Eccles, the guitar player, and Arthur Lee, who is the singer and doesn't play an instrument. He's just a poet, guys.
Oh, so maybe the Jim Morrison comparison is unfortunately apt.
What poetry?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But I think this also gives you a hint as to why some of the songs are so strange in their construction, because they started as poems, and they would just basically be poems set to music. And the best this guy Arthur Lee could do would be kind of loosely hum melodies, right? And so he didn't play anything, but he was considered, he was the front man, he was the star. People were just kind of mesmerized by him and his weirdness. So then they have this guy, Brian McLean. They met him originally. He was a roadie for the Byrds. So the Byrds were also a part of this scene and was basically already really hip. And so they just meet him at some club on the Sunset Strip, and they're like, oh, you have a cadre of girls already following you. You should join our band.
You should be... How many bands are formed around that formula?
And you can play an instrument too, so right. Well,
you can stand. All right, well, you're the bass player.
So the dude that got fired when they let Brian McLean join is a guy called Bobby Buselet, who is the first Manson murderer. He goes on to join the Manson family and be the first murderer. In fact, the one that helped kind of pin all the other murders on Manson ultimately.
Man, he took that shit hard.
All right, get out of here. We got a new guy.
Must kill.
What, dude? That's crazy. Wow.
Okay, one more thing about Arthur Lee, because this guy seems truly nuts, and there's a lot of interview footage of him. He's a real character, and we can talk about what happened. The band broke up shortly after this record was made. But basically, when they got signed, this is just a fun little anecdote about what an asshole this guy is. When they got signed in 1965 by this label called Elektra, which up until then was basically just a small folk music label, but they were trying to branch out. The head of Elektra said he was at the Newport Folk Festival when Dylan went electric, and he had this revelation that, hey, folk music is not the future. I should get into electric bands. And Love is the first band they signed, and they later signed the Doors. But when they signed them, Arthur Lee demands cash up front. They hand him $5,000 in cash, which the Elektra guys assume he's then going to split with the other members of the band. No, he immediately leaves and buys a $4,500 Mercedes and then gives the band $100 each.
Dude, that is brutal. And that's in 67, so $5,000 ain't chump change.
Yeah,
man.
So he's a bit of a character, but okay. So they go into these recording sessions. Again, their previous records had been relatively successful, but partly because of the eccentricity of this guy Arthur Lee, who didn't really want to leave LA, and partially because all the band members were in the midst of heroin addictions off and on. Arthur Lee claims he was never actually strung out, but the other guys definitely had pretty major problems with heroin. They almost never left LA to play music. So their unwillingness to tour is definitely a big part of why they weren't able to sell records. And that plagued them, through their whole career, including this record. So recording sessions, right? They show up and the band is already annoyed with the whole band dynamic at this point, because the way they were writing songs was this guy Arthur Lee would write a poem, and then the two guitar players would basically then write the song around that poem. But the only person that got songwriter credit was this guy Arthur Lee, and as it turned out, the publishing money was really where the money was.
Ah, right.
So
that's pretty that $100 that they got right up front wasn't enough to sustain them for a decade career.
Their first two records actually sold pretty decently, and they're much more rock and roll. They're much more like straight down the line.
Right.
Got some kind of like cult leader skill here or something. How is he convincing these guys to just, and they're writing the tunes? Don't worry about that. I wrote that song.
He sounds like he was a real manipulator, and he was just kind of the hippest guy on the screen. I'm going to invoke the New York Dolls rule that I think Tom said in the New York Dolls episode, which is, if I need to see your outfits to understand your music, you've focused on the wrong thing.
Right.
Because almost, without fail, invariably, when you hear people's descriptions of falling in love with the band Love, it starts with, I walked into the club and I saw the first integrated black and white band on stage, and this crazy front man with crazy sunglasses and crazy fashion and crazy hair. It's like, I don't know, there's not really a mention of
I saw music. The future. Like, I felt like I looked into the future, right?
Right.
Well, that's interesting on so much of what we do on this podcast, right? Which is, if I come into an album like this completely blind, if I was to, give you my vote without having the context and the history, it's a totally different story. So you kind of mix that in with like the idea of seeing somebody live, and there's this impression that you get, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like that's probably I wouldn't have phrased it the way you did, but in looking back on it, probably one of the reasons it was such a slow burn for me, where it really took repeated listens for me to start to get it and feel like, okay, I kind of like this, but I agree that, your perception could be tainted one way or another if you get that visual ahead of time.
I definitely felt like my feelings were more like Rob's, where it's sort of at first I felt, oh, this is very fresh and new. But the more I listened to it, the more doubts I maybe had.
Yeah, I think as a weird little artifact, I do like it. I do definitely like some of the songs, and I think they have some... It's one of those threads in music that didn't get picked up and carried on. I don't really hear... Point me to other bands that sound like this, or that sound like an extension of this. I don't really hear it anywhere throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. So that itself is kind of interesting. But hearing about this band, hearing from this band, hearing all the people idolize Arthur Lee's poetry just really kind of rubs me the wrong way, I have to admit.
It feels a little bit over the top. And I also agree that there's really, for better or worse, there's nothing that sounds like this. I think it works in a lot of ways, but Rob, you're wondering why didn't the sound get picked up? I mean, like, break it down, okay? There's the subject matter is super dark. There's tons of orchestration that apparently was mouthed by this, guru Arthur Lee, the mariachi band. I mean, there's so many just like random elements that for this to have survived, you would really have to focus hard on pulling these random things.
Well, I mean more, there is a line of so-called baroque pop, right, that I think starts more or less with the Beatles, of which this is a descendant. This gets a little weirder, and that's why I invoked King Crimson. But this idea of mixing folk music and acoustic instrumentation with big orchestration, and it's very weird rhythmically too, like almost in a, I don't know, I dare I say Primus kind of way. It takes a lot of weird twists and turns.
That's accurate, man. Good call on Primus.
I really like the King Crimson comp. I wouldn't have said that, but there's something about the use of the 12-string guitar, right, that is very reminiscent of those Crimson sort of interludes, some of the darker sort of broody, moody blues
like the
moments.
soundscapes.
Right?
Well, one of the things I thought when I was listening to it was like, I'm really surprised these guys aren't British, because there is this line, and this is part of what reminds me of King Crimson too, that feels like it goes back to a 19th century court where someone's strumming an auto harp or a dulcimer, something of that nature, or plucking a hurdy-gurdy. There's kind of, a minstrel element, brave, brave Sir Robin kind of thing going on.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, but yeah, let's talk about the tone of this record. So again, this is 67, the so-called Summer of Love, but really darkness was right around the corner. We were in the midst of changing from a kind of a hippy-dippy LA and even greater California into a scary Charles Manson kind of LA. In 1968, we had a bunch of seminal events. RFK was shot. MLK was shot. Of course, the riots that kicked off. It was the biggest casualty year in Vietnam. And like I said, if you look back to what the progenitors of these movements were saying about 1967 and the so-called Summer of Love, whether it's San Francisco or LA, they were already feeling like the hippie ideals were gone. And because of some coverage in the press, teenagers from all over the country had flocked to these places hoping for some kind of free existence, and just drugs had come in, biker gangs had come in, violence, all that kind of stuff. And it had gotten dark. And frankly, the overuse of LSD was a problem.
Did you discover any place where his paranoia came from? Because I
really thought you were going to ask a question about LSD.
What does it stand for?
It stands for lead singer disease.
That was a good one. That was
pretty good. Yeah, like, why was he so paranoid? Was he just mentally unstable? Because I also read that he was really convinced that he was going to die, like, soon after publishing this album, so that this became his like last gasp of creativity and the mark he wanted to leave on the world. Spoiler alert, he lived another 30 or 40 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Or did he?
Right.
Although he ended up doing 6 years of an 11-year sentence in a California prison on a firearm charge.
Jesus.
California.
Yeah, some kind of 3 strikes law sort of thing. But
Wow.
No, I didn't get a super clear answer as to why he was such an odd person. If there was, I don't think there was an actual diagnosed mental illness, but everyone across the board did that thing where they were like, Arthur's Arthur, which is how he's an impossible human being.
Right.
Well, I saw references to one of the terms that I thought was interesting was I saw someone describe him as a much more put together Syd Barrett, which, I can see in some of this material, some of that early Pink Floyd. He didn't strike me as that fucked up, but definitely seems out there.
Well, people seem to say this guy, Johnny Eccles, I heard a lot from him, and I actually heard him on Rick Rubin's podcast talking about this stuff recently. And, fame is part of what got to him. They were big fish in a little pond, or I suppose, in terms of the Hollywood Sunset Strip music scene. They never really left it, but they had very well attended shows. They could always pack the house, and they were kind of like the hippest thing on the block for about 2 years, until like little brother band Jim Morrison, who's basically constantly asking them to hook him up with the record company to try to get their band a contract. So Love is annoyed with Elektra, and they're trying to get out of their contract, and they think, hey, if we hand them another rock band, because this is like a folk label that's trying to get into rock, if we hand them another rock band, maybe they'll get us out of the contract. So they kind of insist and use all their cred to get them to go see the Doors multiple times, ultimately sign them. And then what happens in 1967, the year they're recording this record? Well, the Doors released their first record earlier that year and skyrocket past them with hits like Light My Fire and Break On Through. And that bothered them also.
Did they? But the Doors also agreed to tour outside of LA.
They sure
right?
did.
I wonder if that could have played a role.
No, it's funny you mention that, because I heard John Densmore, I think it's John Densmore, talking about it, one of the original members of the Doors, talking about how they would just hop on a plane and go play like a 3-night run in Florida, and they, or some other region of the country, and they did that every weekend for 2 or 3 years to try to build up this cred.
To some degree, I think. I mean, I just remember watching The Doors, right, when I was, probably a teenager. That seemed like part of the Morrison myth, right? That he could just be anywhere at any time, right?
He'd just show up. He would just,
but also that he could
Right.
also would just disappear, right, for periods of time, because he could just be anywhere.
Yeah. Well, he had a hard time performing, too. One of the reasons they had to get Elektra to see them multiple times was because the first 2 times Jim was just so perilously drunk that the band just sounded like trash. And they were like, no, you need to come one more time. So,
how many chances? I feel like we said that before on another episode where, like, how many chances do you get in front of a record label to be like, no, just come back 3 more times and I promise you. What the hell?
If you look like Jim Morrison looks... with your shirt off. I mean, it's, you get a few extra shots.
I'd come back.
So that's why I never made it. Damn it.
That is correct.
Start lifting weights, stop wearing shirts, man. That's been the magic formula.
Start doing drugs, more drugs.
1 out of 3. I got that.
Okay, let's go and start talking about the specific songs. I have more fun anecdotes to drop in, but let's revisit the first song on the album, which is terribly titled.
5 seconds are very major. It's a very happy sounding guitar, and then it immediately goes minor and starts this strum thing with this like kind of flamenco sound to it. And immediately I was captured. So congrats on that first track for grabbing my attention. This song starts what a lot of the rest of the songs have, which thankfully Tom's not on this podcast, which is hard panning the drums.
Yeah.
I feel like just about every song does that, but it somehow works on this album versus like a Dr. John where it takes you so out of it.
Maybe this will play out over time, right? But there is something. I don't know where it is, but there was a line in the sand where people said, hey, we can't do this anymore, and they stopped, right?
We should find, along the musical timeline. Like, when was it? When
and
was
it's
the
right in
last
this
one?
spot. Like, we're right in the sweet spot. 66, 69, right? Like, they're still experimenting, but by Abbey Road, Beatles aren't doing that shit anymore. Right, that's over for them.
Well,
anyway.
Speaking just of the mix, though, one of the things I had to check myself and actually go listen to some Sgt. Pepper's, because the drums are so low in this mix. And sometimes the drummer's doing a lot of really rocky stuff, but they're so low down. And I was like, oh, is this just how they put drums? The vocals are really high up. The acoustic guitar is really high up. The orchestration sometimes is high up. But that rhythm section is buried in the back. And I checked it against Sgt. Pepper and some other Ringo recordings. Not the case. Much rockier sound.
Yeah, you almost can't hear the kick drum in the mix. You hear the snare, it might be brushes. You hear the hi-hat because they're high-frequency instruments. They cut. But everything south of that is almost inaudible. So that's interesting.
Well, and I feel like it's inconsistent too, where I do feel like there are some songs where you hear, it's much more rhythm forward, or at least that's how it's mixed. And then others it's really buried. And so it didn't feel like there was a lot of, consistency in terms of the mixing.
Yeah, so we should mention that a guy called Bruce Botnick was both engineer and producer on this record, and it was his first time producing a record. The record company originally signed on Neil Young, and I think he came really close to actually even making it to the studio. And as we said, there's a debate about whether Neil Young left of his own volition or the band says that, hey, because they knew Neil Young as a friend, they were like, this guy can't produce our record, get out of here. I tend to believe the first version. But in any case, the record company felt, Love wanted to produce the record themselves, but the record company felt like there needed to be an adult in the room. And so they gave a first-time producer, Bruce Botnick, a chance. He went on to also engineer and produce some of those Doors recordings for Elektra as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a little bit of weirdness and inconsistency here. Yeah, that said, sorry, I'll just give my opinion on this song. I think this is the best song on the record. So I don't feel like it gave me it got me excited when I first turned it on. It sounds like something I haven't heard before. The trumpet solo, which we called out and which we can drop in, but it reminded me of another of my favorite bands, Belle and Sebastian.
They came up for me a few times.
After listening to this?
Well, in a few of the songs, not this one specifically, one we'll talk about later.
Oh, just thinking about, I gotcha, yeah.
So the trumpet part, I agree with you, Rob. I think this is a great song. I think it's beautiful. I love the acoustic intro. Like it's a solid kickoff song, but because of the sort of spaghetti western kind of feel to it, there's nothing else on the record that's quite like that. So I do think it sets it sort of gives you a fake out. Almost. It's weird and wacky, and a lot of these songs are, so I guess it's similar in that sense, but it did throw me off a little bit.
So speaking of it being different from the other songs, this is one of two songs on the record that was not written by Arthur Lee. It's credited to that guy Brian McLean. And the band was already pissed off, and I didn't kind of finish that story, right? But they had internally decided that this record, they were going to solve this internal kind of publishing songwriter dispute by making a double album. And on that double album, Arthur Lee would get two sides of the four. Johnny Eccles would get one side of a record as a songwriter. And Brian McLean would get one side of a record as a songwriter. And that's what they prepared for. And then they get to the studio and Elektra says, that's too expensive. We're not doing that. Go back to playing Arthur Lee's songs.
Why do bands think a double album is the solution for anything? I feel like it's...
But there was debate about whether or not Arthur Lee is actually the one that manipulated that in the background or what. But anyway, this song of Brian McLean's not only became the first track on the album, what I feel is the best song on the album, but it was also the first single they released.
Lee must have been pissed.
Yeah, I think so. So speaking of that, Phil, so because that songwriter kerfuffle annoyed the heck out of the band, and that had some other implications for the recording process we'll get into, but Brian McLean, as they were finishing this record up, Forever Changes, Brian McLean cut a deal with Elektra because he was aggrieved, and they agreed to produce a solo record of his. They said, you're going to stay in Love, of course, continue making records, but we'll also give you a solo contract for a record to kind of mollify you. And he gets excited. He calls up his buddy Johnny Eccles. Oh man, I got this deal for a solo record. Johnny Eccles is like, oh, it's awesome, man. I'm happy for you. They call up Arthur Lee. Hey Arthur, I got this solo record coming out. Arthur's like, that's great. You're fired.
Jesus Christ.
This guy's a real lead singer.
And that was the end of his involvement in the band. So
jeez. I'm starting to like this guy less and less because I've only heard, I listened to a handful of those interviews you were talking about, Rob, where everyone is just like, oh, he's such a visionary and he's amazing. And I, hearing some of these seedier details.
Are you saying a lead singer from Los Angeles who doesn't play an instrument isn't like the most normal, high functioning individual?
He's sounding more and more like a cult leader to me in the way that he's able to put people under his spell and the way he sort of throws people out also when they sort of stand up to him with the first signs. Mm-hmm. And, for those out there who don't know, I am just absolutely the kind of person that could get pulled into a cult. So I'm more and more interested all the time. So
that's good to know. I'm going to use that information.
Phil invested heavily in Theranos.
That's not a cult. That's just Silicon Valley, Adam.
You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I guess I'm part of that cult. Let's move on to the next song we're going to talk about on our focus list. It's called A House Is Not a Motel.
At my house I've got no shackles. You can come and look if you want to. Through the halls you'll see the mantles where the light shines dim all around you. And the streets are paved with gold. And if someone asks you, you can call my name. You're just a thought that someone, somewhere, somehow feels you should be here. And it's so for real to touch.
First off, yet another song title that is terrible.
Terrible. Absolutely.
Yeah, they're not really nailing it with the song title department, and they get worse actually as the album goes along.
Hard to believe, right? Well, I assume this is a reference to the Bacharach and David, A House Is Not a Home. I don't know if you guys have heard that, like Dionne Warwick.
There was some beef there where he covered it, but he changed it so much that Bacharach got pissed or something like that. He changed the chord pattern, or
I don't know. I didn't mean it was a cover. I just meant it was like a reference to that song title. Maybe.
Yeah, I thought I read something that he had covered Burt Bacharach's song, but had changed it so much that Bacharach was pissed. And there was a little tension there.
I remember reading that about Thelonious Monk's approach to songwriting. He'd be just like, take an old song you like, then change the melody, and then just change the chords underneath that. Now you got a new song.
You got a new song. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna use that tonight on this album. All right, guys, I'm gonna have a.
And he's
it's
kind of
fresh
right.
tracks tomorrow.
It's a real ship of Theseus
It is
kind of problem. You know?
He's like, hey, I got this new project. It's called Hate. It's great.
Forever keeps.
What did you guys think about this song, though?
I thought this song had the most directly influenced the Doors. My note was, if the Doors were better, it might sound like this. I also listened to the parts of that Rick Rubin interview with Johnny Eccles, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this a song he talks about where he did two guitar solos like over top of each other, and one of them he couldn't hear. Like his headphones were fucked up, so he couldn't hear the first one. So he's really doing the second solo blind, and they kind of like mashed them together. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, that's this song. Let's drop in a piece of the two guitar solos.
Yeah, I thought that part was a little. I don't know if two guitar solos happening, one in each ear, is normal, but
You kidding me? Tony Iommi based a career on that sound.
I thought it sounded like Black Sabbath. Yeah, totally.
This is classic guitar player BS, by the way. It's like, one solo didn't do the trick. Just add another one on top of it.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. Just hard pan those fuckers.
And I'm not, to be clear, I'm not above it at all. I am just saying that's what you do when you're like, first solo didn't make the grade. Just add another one on top. Don't even need to listen to the first one.
Who do you think I am? Mark Knopfler.
Maybe he gets paid per solo. I thought it was a cool song, though, in general. I mean, again, kind of weird. This song in particular seems obvious to me now that he was just lyrics only, and then the music had to sort of fall in line with that, because the lyrics in this song are kind of weird.
Yeah, he gets all this credit for being this amazing prophetic lyricist, and actually even the term, this connection to Jim Morrison, I heard someone in very pretentious fashion call Arthur Lee the John the Baptist to Jim Morrison's Antichrist Jesus. But I don't get it at all. I think Jim Morrison, I don't even like Jim Morrison's lyrics that much, but these lyrics are worse.
In this metaphor, who is Bob Dylan? Like, where does he fit in? Because like Bob Dylan 1967 is just slaying it, right? Like, it's like Masters of War.
This is pure cult leader lane. This is not
yeah.
This is not Nobel laureate.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Sorry.
So we talked about Dylan though doing the thing where it's just gibberish, and then he drops in one line that kind of knocks you out. I thought that this had one of those. At least I liked the line, which was, "The news today will be the movies of tomorrow." I was like,
that was a good line.
Pretty cool line.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I think this one was one of the ones that was kind of directly about Vietnam. He's talking about blood transfusions, and I heard this, that they heard from a soldier who had come back from Vietnam, this line about when blood mixes with mud, it turns to gray. So that's where that line comes from too.
It's pretty heavy. Getting back to the guitar solo sound. So when did this sound emerge? Again, because you can jump forward whatever it would be 7 years, and you hear, I mean, this really could be, a kind of shitty Sabbath solo, but like that sound of the guitar, Phil, from like a guitar player standpoint, when did that type of fuzz come into the picture? Because I'm trying to, like, I'm thinking to like the Beatles, they weren't very overdriven. The Byrds didn't have a lot of these. I know, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but that's even later. So yeah.
Yeah, so you've got the fuzz face and the tone bender that probably would have come out around like 65 or 66. Because like Hendrix was definitely using those. So I
just on terms of tone.
But that's also about hitting the market, yeah.
Just on terms of tone, though, I happen to know, because I heard Johnny Eccles speak about it, that he used no effects. It was pure AC30, Vox AC30 amp, just cranked. And that was one of the reasons he couldn't do that second solo in the booth and solve the headphone problem of hearing the other thing, because he needed the amp to be really loud. And so he even commented, had some self-awareness, that he was like, Hendrix came along sort of very shortly after us, and he adopted technology in a way that I was unwilling to do, and that is what elevated him.
So he was a purist and like just crank my amp versus let me use a fuzz face.
The fuzz face came out in 66. I just looked up. So right around this time.
That's interesting.
But you still have some people wanting to embrace that, and some people going like, what's the point? That's just bells and whistles. It's not the real thing. And at least according to Johnny Eccles, I don't know all the stuff that Hendrix used. Obviously, he used the wah-wah pedal to great effect. But I know that Eccles said like he didn't kin to any of that stuff.
Well, I think over the backdrop of what's mostly acoustic music, maybe there's a thought at the time where it's like, is that taking this too far? Like, is that contrast with the rest of the album too much? Because it's there's so much acoustic 12-string. There's 12-string solos, I think, on this album that.
Yeah, there's not a ton of electric on here. I mean, there's just like the solos. There's a couple solos, right?
Yeah, but I would just say that is true. But I would say they're not afraid of contrast.
That is true.
A lot of mash up,
right.
conflicting ideas here. But yeah, I mean, in my opinion, the guitar playing is fairly forward-thinking for when it's happening and what it is. So I would agree with that.
My only other note is that this song was the first spot where he introduced himself singing out of key on the album. This one, I hear you calling my name. I'm like, come on, dude. He spent 64 hours on this album. You couldn't have just thrown an extra half hour in to just recut that.
Hey, at least he got to track number 2. I mean, that's...
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, lead singer. Yep.
Well, actually, no, because I think the first one is led by Brian McLean, and then Arthur Lee's just singing backups on it.
Okay. This is tracking.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to yet another terrible song title. And More Again. No spaces.
And if you see and more again, then you will know and more again. For you can see you in her eyes. Then you feel your heart beating, bum 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 bum. And when you've given all you had and everything.
I don't know if you guys heard this, but I have a fun little anecdote about these recording sessions. So as I mentioned, the band had internally, they thought, agreed that they were going to go in and record the two guitar players' compositions, and they were prepared for that, and it was going to be this double album. Then they kind of just get to the studio, and they're very disappointed. The record company says, no, it's not happening. And then they start the sessions, and they suck. So, and we'll talk about why in a second, because there's conflicting reports of why they suck, but they were abjectly terrible. And so Bruce...
God, I wish there were recordings of this, some masters laying around.
So I saw a clip of that guy, Bruce Botnick, the producer, who's like, yeah, I fired the band. And I called in the Wrecking Crew, as one does.
Yes.
And
you're right, they're in L.A.
And the Wrecking Crew came in and played on a few songs. They played like half a day. They knocked out at least 2 of the songs. This is one of them. So this song is the Wrecking Crew as the rhythm section. Hal Blaine on drums, Carol Kay on bass. And apparently that really upset the band so much to sit back and watch the Wrecking Crew.
Didn't they make the other band like watch the Wrecking Crew play this as like some form of like shaming ritual?
right.
See how much you guys suck.
So then they were like, okay, we could do this. Give us another chance. And they left for like a week to continue rehearsing and came back. But this is one of the 2 songs that remained on the record as a Wrecking Crew track.
Oh, wow.
That does make sense, because even before I knew that tidbit as well, I paused when I got to this song, and I didn't think this song was great. It was a little too kind of Simon and Garfunkel-ish for me, but I did feel like it felt more put together, which makes perfect sense now, knowing that it was great session musicians.
So was it that they sucked, or they just weren't together, like they didn't know the songs? Because you can't just go away for a week and be like, hey guys, we can't play our instruments.
So
let's do a week of...
I'm not sure who to believe in this case, because
okay.
The band, you hear 2 different things. You hear either they were just totally unprepared because they were already infighting and didn't have good chemistry and just hadn't prepared enough, or that the band, everyone who wasn't Arthur Lee, was so mad at Arthur Lee that they were like, we're not gonna give it our best. We're just gonna we're not gonna support his songs. We're just gonna let the guy who doesn't play an instrument tell us what to play, and if he doesn't tell us to play it, we're not gonna do it. Like, not fulfill the role they had been fulfilling because they were pissed off at him. A third option would be heroin, which was a real problem. And little fun anecdote of after this record was released, they did a couple shows outside of LA, but they really had a hard time keeping the tour together. I think they went to New York for a quick residency and maybe played a couple shows in the area, but the band pretty quickly disintegrated after that, to the point where in 1968, Johnny Eccles, the guitar player, and the bass player, Ken Forsey, broke into the rehearsal space of the band they were no longer a part of, stole all the instruments, and sold them for junk.
Oh, my God. Holy crap.
Okay, but back to this song. I think this song is friggin' terrible. I don't know what is going on with this vocal approach.
And arm. It just sounds like a frog. The melody line's uncompelling, and
it's so strange rhythmically that I'm glad they had this anchor of sick studio musicians to anchor it. But then they, of course, put vocals and acoustic guitars on it. And some of these acoustic guitar fills, it's just not very well played acoustic guitar, in my opinion.
100%.
Well, here's where I start to, at this point in the album and in the conversation, really get a bit aggrieved by the fanfare over this album, because this song is, I saw countless references to this song specifically, among a few of the others we've already talked about, as being like one of the best songs ever and one of the songs you should listen to, before you die. And I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing that connection.
This wouldn't make the C side of a Simon and Garfunkel release.
This had one of the most egregious opportunities that was not taken. If you go to 127 and listen through.
And you don't know how much I love you.
There's such an opportunity for them to modulate, to change the key. Like they're lining it up, and you're waiting as a listener. You're like, oh, here it comes finally something for me to sink my teeth into. Here comes a key change, and it goes right back to where it was. So anticlimactic.
Baroque snoozeville.
And instead you get that weird auto harp crappy sound, like 19th century English court entertainment.
Right. It's like, well, this is the opposite of what I wanted.
Exactly. Yeah, this one was a pass for me. At this point in the record, I started to get a little wary, and I agree with everything Alan said. And fans of Love that are listening, it only gets worse from here. On to the next song on our focus list, The Red Telephone.
Sitting on a hillside, watching all the people die. I'll feel much better on the other side of the ride. I believe in magic. Why? Because it is so quick. I don't need power when I'm hypnotized.
The title sounds like a Hardy Boys book.
This is just And More Again Part 2, right?
Yes, I thought that this sounded exactly like something else on the album. All right, I'm not crazy.
I hate the vocal delivery of the word magic and quick. That thing where they zoom in and then like punch it. It's so...
That's a very
it takes
Tom
me out of it.
comment, I feel like. To hate something that specific.
So silly. And speaking of the great poet, the prophetic poet up on the mount, listen to these lyrics. Look in my eyes, what are you seeing? How do you feel? I'll feel real phony when my name is Phil.
What the fuck's he saying? What's he trying to say?
Don't know.
No, but then the follow-up line is something about Bill.
Yeah, it was like
he
Phil
uses
or Bill.
another name for the rhyme.
What are we talking about? Listen, we can all agree that Wikipedia is pretty silly sometimes, but the best thing I read in Wikipedia was this. For some reason, this song has its own Wikipedia page, and one of the lines is that, according to legend, the house that the members of Love lived in had a red telephone, although the song lyrics do not relate to this at all.
Man,
Great.
Close the file on that one.
Wow.
That's all ridiculous. Everything we just talked about. However, I really like this song. Like, I think it has this like really haunting vibe for me that all the themes that we're talking about as far as like, you know, paranoia and mortality and all that stuff, to me, I feel like that is all distilled into this song. As ridiculous as it is, there's just something about it that was very evocative of like a haunting type of feeling, where I almost felt like I was like I was on mushrooms or something, but it was going kind of wonky. I don't know. I really like this song.
Really? So this is the song where I was listening to this in the car with my wife a couple days ago, and she normally doesn't comment at all on music, even the music I make. She kind of stays pretty silent. But she she goes, "Hey, listen, I know you're listening to this for the podcast, like basically for work, so you don't need to turn it off or anything, but this is terrible."
Oh, man.
Fair enough. Well, I'll remember that next time I see her.
I'll defend Alan's standpoint a little bit. I think that if the song had started at 147, it would be a lot better. Let's drop that here.
Sometimes my life is so eerie, and if you think I'm happy, paint me yellow.
So there's a nice swell of strings where something actually happens. It's a relatively engaging string line, and I feel like if the song had started there, it would be a little more redeemable. Although, again, now I'll go against myself and I'll say that the ahs at the end of the song are so sour and off key that it hurt me. It hurt my soul a little bit. So that was a little rough getting through the end of this one.
It just felt, and to me, this song kind of typified what I saw as the main problem of the record, is that there were a lot of interesting ideas, and they were definitely different. Like, it's definitely singular, right? But it goes on too long, and it just feels like they threw everything at the wall, and didn't really have a filter filtration mechanism for what was working and what wasn't.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Is this has the spoken word
Yes.
part at the end,
Yes,
right?
it does.
Yeah. I kind of liked that.
I kind of always like those. I'm a real sucker for that moody booze bullshit. Yeah.
I did too. It sounded a bit nursery rhyme.
And because the chord pattern at the end was just major, minor. Same chord, major, minor, as they were kind of doing this talking, which I thought was kind of cool. Yeah, a little nursery rhymey, but I thought it actually worked in the outro.
So the one compliment I'll give it, which because I like stuff like this, is he has the line, "If you think I'm happy, paint me," and then on one side it says white, and on the other side it says yellow.
That was freaky, yeah.
Now
They say both, right?
They say both at the same time
Yeah.
in different ears, and it's just a little bit of a weird thing. And I assume he's talking at least partially about race and the race of the folks in Vietnam that were fighting. I heard that it might also be a reference to the yellow smiley face that was kind of a symbol of the hippie movement. But either way, it did kind of snap me out of my stupor when that part came on when I was actively listening. I like little tricks like that.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Okay, that's enough.
I wrote down, this is Belle and Sebastian meets the Smiths, where just is a little upbeat, kind of catchy, but fell pretty flat for me, to be honest.
I kind of like this song. See, I'm on the other side of this one. For me, I agree. This one does feel like sort of a weird departure on the record, but this is one of the ones that I don't know, just felt more. I don't know, something about it resonated with me.
I like this one a bit better too, but I think the lyrics are laughably stupid. And I heard this one particularly lauded as this great forward-thinking tone poem about Vietnam, and I don't buy that at all. And I have to say, I think more part of my problem, I already mentioned it, is Arthur Lee's vocal delivery. He just sounds so overly performative and proper, like he's doing Shakespeare in high school or something. That just kind
of hacky.
It's hacky.
Yeah.
It takes it down a notch for me. But I do like the kind of the construction of the song overall.
Well, here's what I'm wondering though. I think we talked a lot about this being overrated or not worthy of probably the cult praise that it gets. But why is that? What is it that I'm on the record saying that I like this album, but it's hard for me to visualize what is so groundbreaking about it or what has given it that retrospective adulation. Is it that this was super experimental, or why this?
I think the experimental aspect is definitely a part of it, and I think it was. Some people see it as America's answer to the experimentation of the Beatles in the studio, and at a time when there wasn't as much of that going on in America and in California, even with.
When did Pet Sounds come out?
The year before this.
Right.
Oh, wait. All right. Theory debunked.
Do you think McCartney's Live and Let Die is a love diss?
Diss tracks.
I think Albert Broccoli wrote that for him, right?
I don't know.
Oh, James Bond guy?
Yeah, because he wrote that for a James Bond movie.
Sure.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Roger
So I
Moore?
think they
Is
gave
that
him
one of the
the
Roger
title.
Moore ones?
Yeah, it's the Roger Moore.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Can we talk about the guitar solo at 408?
Sure.
We could drop that here. This is the most 1960s solo I've ever heard. All these people knew Hendrix. Couldn't they have just called in a favor and just had him come in and play for 10 seconds? Because this is just terrible.
It's straight out of Sympathy from the Devil.
Yeah, well, I feel I can't say all because it's a decade, but any 1960s non-pentatonic, non-blues guitar solo kind of sucked. They just didn't know what they were doing. It's just so odd.
I think the fact that this exists in the same universe as Hendrix makes it suck. I think it wouldn't be so bad, but Are You Experienced
you're right.
came out earlier this year.
Right.
You've seen what it can be.
Right. You've seen what this guitar can do. Oh, and they're not doing
Could you imagine going to a show where, I would imagine an up-and-comer Jimi Hendrix would open for Say Love in L.A.? Must have been a weird transition.
And they would have just fallen into the hole that they had burned into the floor.
Yeah, I didn't research, understandably, I didn't research a lot of Jimi Hendrix and the Jimi Hendrix Experience and their story, because I know they got their start in London, right? Hendrix went over to England, and that's where he met Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell and put together that band. But maybe they were back in the States at this point. Unclear. Don't know if he saw Love. Anyway, people say that he was influenced by Arthur Lee's sort of fashion sense and things like that. But okay, I think we've waxed on about Love plenty long. Now, all that remains is for us to take a vote. Is Love's Forever Changes something that you must hear before you die? Alan.
I say yes. And I'm beating a dead horse here. It's nowhere near worthy of the. I've seen this in, I'm talking like YouTube comments and user reviews. Many people saying literally this is the best album of all time. And that's ludicrous. But I think it's really unique. There is really nothing like this. I'll play it again. I might need to let this one sit on the shelf for a bit, but I'll definitely pop this one on again. And I do think it's worth a listen. What's it, 41 minutes? What else are you can do with 41 minutes?
40 minutes you could listen to part of a spiritualized album.
God.
All right, so
one sweet.
Right.
Blue.
So this album is at times so of an era, namely the 60s. And at other times it's unlike anything else I've heard. At times it's mediocre. There are flashes of genius, and this one is going to squeak by, but I'm going to say yes. I think you need to hear this before you die. So it's a yes for me. But Rob and Phil, you guys did a decent job of almost convincing me to go the other way. Not that you were trying to convince me, but just listening to your thoughts. I was kind of leaning, but then I brought it back.
Yeah, I mean, I came into this. That was a yes, right, Adam?
That was a yes after
sure
a bunch of qualifying.
Yeah, well, I was making sure because I'm jumping in, and you know how to.
Phil wants to know what kind of leverage he has.
No, oddly, I do think is the right word. I'm also going to give this a yes. This sort of gets, and Alan, I think you said it well with John Martin, or you said it well. I'll listen to this again. It reminded me of John Martin?
John Martin.
Yeah. That record also very of an era, and sort of maybe if I listen to it 10 times, I'll realize I hate this. I can't ever listen to this again. But for the same reason, I'll say yes to this as why I say no to Devendra Banhart, which is this does have a background quality element, right? It has a world music element. So you got to ignore it if you want to, right? You can listen at it or past it. And for that reason, I'll take the old furniture music over the new furniture music. So
wow.
IKEA's
high praise.
so yes, I'll give Love's I'll give Love Forever Changes yes. You must put this furniture music in your home and in your ears.
I really was conflicted about it this week and during this conversation, but I think it's going to squeak by into yes for me as well. I do think it's singular and unique, and so many people seem to reference it. And I think the thing that I like, though, is that a lot of thought and work was put in. They did throw a lot of ideas at the wall. And I like records that break bands up. As I mentioned, the original lineup
That's awesome.
dissolved immediately. Now, Arthur Lee continued as Love with a bunch of other people and made several more records, and I think at some point even may have toured. But this is considered the definitive lineup of Love. This is considered their definitive album. And even though I can't really picture myself listening to it again, I'm not sad I'd listen to it or anything. So, sure, give it a spin.
What a testimonial. I'm not sad I listened to it or anything.
I was sad I listened to the Spiritualized album. That's part of my life I can never get back.
Man, they're entering our pantheon of shit bands.
Right.
Okay, so 2 things remain. Thanks for listening this far. We're going to get our homework soon for next week. But first, I thought I would dive into the old listener mailbag. Really appreciate all the great mail y'all have been sending us. We're a little backed up here I'm going to issue a quick correction because we love those. And then I'm going to read a piece of listener mail that I think might be the best crafted missive we've received thus far.
Oh, I love the mailbag. It's my favorite part of the show.
The mail never stops.
Here we go. First up, a correction. Aaron from Colorado Springs writes, on episode number 90, Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic, someone mentioned that there was a song on Beavis and Butthead's soundtrack about Anthony Kiedis slamming his dick in the dirt. It was.
I love this is what they grabbed onto.
It was actually on the Wayne's World soundtrack. And it was a song called Sicka Mechanico. I think I'm saying that right.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we needed to know that clearly.
Thank you.
The actual line from the song is, shake it, girl, you won't get hurt. I knock my dick into the dirt.
Damn, dude. He's the Arthur Lee of the 80s, 90s.
Keeping the LA scene alive, you know?
This listener goes on to mention that the song was actually the B-side on the Under the Bridge single in certain countries, and that, in fact, on later non-US single cuts of Under the Bridge, Red Hot Chili Peppers had an instrumental song, which we were all hoping for, called Fela's Cock.
Wow.
I assume referring to one Fela Kuti.
Wow. Okay. Well, there you have it.
Good.
So, quick correction. So you can now find that. It's on the playlist. I've added it to the playlist for that episode, or you could look it up on the Wayne's World soundtrack yourself. And now for the listener mail of a different format. This is Chris from San Diego, and he writes, I'm constantly impressed by the lack of in-depth knowledge for a group of professional musicians. It's coming in hot.
He's coming in hot.
Your taste in music is predictably Steely Dan on white bread. That was also the subject of his email, by the way.
That is
That's a
excellent.
great subject line.
With the exception of Sparks, Come Out of My House, although most of you fell short there as well. A laudatory exposition on Big Star's thoroughly mediocre debut, Randy Newman, and the softest of critiques for one of the most milquetoast artists of the century, Paul Simon. Then, the juvenile analysis of Dr. John's Grigri, with the exception of one guy in his tweet-length review, my sincerest apologies, I forgot his name. With this grave injustice, I think he's referring to Dr. John's Grigri. With this grave injustice, I could no longer be satisfied with yelling at my speakers. Certainly, this is a challenging album, as are many artistic statements, but the flaccid curiosity of musicians in the face of this challenge is truly unfortunate.
So did we lose a listener? That was so wordy. I don't know what happened.
Listening
there.
is fine too. We're right.
First of all, this is the best constructed, just in terms of the words used, the vocab, etc.
Yes, yeah.
Bravo.
Well, and the tone is very clear. And
Yes.
Hey, we said give us your complaints, and I'm very happy to receive this complaint. Now,
You're very welcome.
Chris closes it out by saying, that said, I genuinely enjoy the podcast and your banter, even if I find your overall taste to be lacking. But who am I? Postscript, you nailed it with Kid Rock.
man, we'd had a problem if you disagreed with that.
We redeemed it there. Right.
So I think we're ready to have a beer with this guy. But
Absolutely.
But send us more like that, listeners. Send them on over. Send whatever you want to say. Ask us a question. Make us a correction. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us we're right. Or complain about our taste generally at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to get our homework for next week. Tom has shipped the Albinator in dry ice over to my house. I've taken it out of its casing. It's in there with a couple live lobsters. I'm turning the key now, and next week we shall be listening to Sam Cooke live at the Harlem Square Club.
Oh, who's white bread now?
Boosh.
It's live. All right. Very cool. Very cool.
Love Sam Cooke, but can't say I know this particular recording, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm in the
Nice.
same boat. I'm not sure that I'm familiar with this record, or I'm not familiar at all.
Yeah, I know the greatest hits. He's a great singer. He
Yeah,
wrote
probably a
some
lot of
great
standards.
tunes.
Where is it from? It's live from where?
Harlem Square Club.
Oh, that's promising.
Well, stay tuned for that, listeners. Start listening now. Join us next week to discuss Sam Cooke in depth. We appreciate you hanging on this long. We look forward to seeing you again. And for 1001 Album Complaints, I have been Rob.
I'm Alan.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Phil.
Boosh.